This is you. They tell you the life expectancy of a known cartel informant in Miami is less than 48 hours. But when you are 29 years old, staring at the peeling paint of a federal holding cell with 15 years of mandatory minimums hanging over your head, math simply becomes a survival mechanism. You were just moving product, driving 2 kilos of cocaine up the I-95 for a mid-level dealer named Trey. It was easy money until the red and blue lights flashed in your rearview mirror and your entire future collapsed into a concrete box. The door opens and Special Agent Harrison walks in. He does not yell or slam his fist on the metal table. Instead, he sits down with a terrifying calmness and slides a folder across to you. He knows everything. He knows your routes and exactly how much Trey pays you. Worse, he knows about Helen. He knows your mother lives in a rundown apartment in Tampa, working 2 exhausting jobs just to keep the lights on. Completely unaware of how her son really makes his money, Harrison makes it clear that he is not interested in a replaceable driver like you. He wants Trey, and he wants the organization above him. The DEA is offering you a brutal trade. Take the 15 years and let your mother grow old alone while you rot behind bars. Or walk out of this precinct today as a free man, provided you become their eyes and ears. You know what happens to rats. You have heard the stories of bodies dumped in the Everglades, of the ultimate price paid for cooperation. But you are looking at a man holding the keys to your life, and the thought of your mother crying in a courtroom breaks you. You nod. You agree to cooperate. The charges evaporate, held in suspension over your head like a loaded gun. They let you walk out into the blinding Florida sun, sending you straight back into the jaws of the cartel. You are free, but this freedom feels exactly like a delayed death sentence. Now you have to figure out how to survive your very first night back without anyone realizing you belong to the feds. The next morning finds you back in the driver's seat of Trey's battered sedan, gripping the steering wheel so hard your knuckles turn white as you resume your lethal routine. You do not wear a physical wire because a wire can be found during a random pat-down, and a wire gets you killed before the sun even goes down over the Miami skyline. Instead, your own mind becomes the recording device, an invisible trap capturing every single microscopic detail of the criminal underworld. Every neon-lit motel on the outskirts of the city, every out-of-state license plate of every drop-off vehicle, every burner phone number casually tossed around in smoky back rooms must be memorized and fiercely guarded in your brain until you can safely repeat it all to Agent Harrison in desolate parking lots. The mental toll is immediate and utterly agonizing. You spend the first month suffocating under a blanket of pure unrelenting terror, where every casual conversation feels like a meticulously laid trap, and every lingering glance from Trey's armed enforcers feels like a silent accusation. You are absolutely convinced they know the truth, certain that someone saw you walking out of that federal building as a free man instead of being processed for county jail. This crushing, omnipresent paranoia manifests physically, birthing a violent twitch in your left eye that you cannot control no matter how hard you rub your face in the rearview mirror. You drop nearly 20 pounds in just 3 weeks because eating feels like swallowing crushed glass. Your stomach remaining permanently clenched in a tight, painful knot of anxiety from the second you open your eyes. You lie awake at night in your sweltering apartment, staring blankly at the ceiling fan while frantically rehearsing innocent explanations for questions nobody has even asked you yet, building ironclad alibis for interrogations that exist only in your own feverish imagination. But the terrifying reality of your situation slowly reveals itself through the deafening silence of the cartel. Nobody asks you anything, and nobody suspects a single thing because you realize you're simply too small to monitor. You are just one insignificant cog in a massive, sprawling narcotic machine stretching across Florida, a machine that employs thousands of nameless drivers, street-level lookouts, and corner boys. They do not have the manpower or the resources to watch everyone, so they rely on a much cheaper, much more effective tool to ensure absolute loyalty. They trust the paralyzing fear of what happens to rats to keep everyone in line, fully believing the gruesome ghost stories of bodies dissolving in the swamps are enough to prevent any thought of betrayal. Fear has always been their ultimate weapon and their perfect shield. Except now, their flawless system is quietly breaking from the inside. Except now, you have proven that the paralyzing fear of the cartel has absolute limits when placed on a scale against your own desperate need to survive. Your intelligence finally begins to draw blood by the end of your first year, though you never pull a trigger yourself. You feed Harrison a steady diet of license plates, drop-off times, and stash house locations, and slowly, methodically, The DEA begins to strike. They do not sweep in with massive raids that would immediately raise cartel alarms. Instead, they orchestrate perfectly timed traffic stops, execute quiet search warrants, and pull low-level dealers off the neon-lit streets one by one. You do not know the real names of the men who get arrested, and you force yourself not to learn them, treating them as necessary abstractions in the brutal, unforgiving calculus of your own survival. But this string of targeted arrests creates a sudden vacuum in the local hierarchy, and in the underworld, a vacuum is always filled by the most aggressive survivor. Trey gets promoted, stepping over the empty chairs of men who are now sitting in federal holding cells, and because you have been his reliable, fiercely loyal driver through all the chaos, he pulls you up right alongside him. Suddenly, you are no longer just hauling 2 kilos in a battered trunk. You're standing in the shadows of luxury Miami penthouses, listening to regional lieutenants discuss offshore bank accounts, shipping container logistics, and the massive flow of uncut product arriving straight from the southern border. You are memorizing numbers with too many zeros and faces that hold terrifying power, becoming infinitely more valuable to Agent Harrison with every breath you take in those heavily guarded rooms. But this increased value comes with a horrifying complication when Trey pulls you aside one sweltering afternoon, his eyes dark and frantic with suspicion, and tells you that the organization is bleeding product and money. He knows someone inside his inner circle is either stealing or talking to the feds, and in a twisted, sickening stroke of irony, he assigns you, his most trusted, silent right-hand man, to find the rat. You are now a spy for the cartel while simultaneously spying against them, and the suffocating layers of deception begin to fracture your sanity. You know you desperately need a sacrificial lamb to satisfy Trey's raging paranoia and protect your own cover, and you find it in a reckless 19-year-old runner named Leo who has been stupidly skimming small amounts of product to sell on his own. You do not report Leo's theft to Harrison. Instead, you hand his name directly to Trey, fully understanding the devastating, irreversible weight of your words. You watch Trey nod slowly, the violent verdict already decided in his cold eyes. Leo disappears completely 3 days later, leaving behind only a frantic mother handing out missing person flyers on the humid street corners of Little Havana. You walk past one of those flyers on your way to a meeting, staring at the smiling face of the boy whose death you orchestrated, and the sickening realization washes over you like ice water. You are no longer just a desperate victim trying to stay out of a cage. You have actively become a monster, pushing another human being into a shallow grave just to buy yourself one more day of breathing. The guilt of Leo's disappearance barely has time to settle into your bones before the universe delivers a completely different kind of devastation right to your front door. You receive a frantic phone call from Tampa in the middle of a torrential Florida downpour. The fragile voice on the other end delivering the agonizing news that your mother, Helen, has collapsed at her second job and the doctors have found an aggressive mass in her lungs. The diagnosis is cancer, caught just late enough to require immediate, terrifyingly expensive medical intervention that your modest warehouse cover job and your cartel blood money cannot even begin to cover. Panic consumes you entirely as you stare at a stack of mounting hospital bills that look like a secondary death sentence, realizing that the woman you sacrificed your soul to protect is now dying because you simply cannot afford to save her. In a moment of pure, suffocating desperation, you break protocol and beg Agent Harrison for a lifeline during a tense meeting behind a deserted Miami strip mall. He listens quietly, his face an unreadable mask of calculated empathy, before making a few encrypted phone calls that alter the trajectory of your existence forever. 2 weeks later, by some dark administrative miracle, every single one of Helen's staggering medical expenses is quietly paid in full by a phantom charitable fund that officially does not exist, managed by federal accountants who will never acknowledge its true purpose. When you see the zeroed out balance on the hospital invoice, a chilling, profound realization paralyzes you right there in the glaring fluorescent corridor. You are no longer just a leveraged criminal being temporarily blackmailed by the threat of a prison sentence. You have been officially purchased. Your absolute loyalty, your every waking breath, and your very soul have been bought and paid for through the salsa chemotherapy chemicals dripping slowly into your mother's veins. The DEA owns you now, just as ruthlessly as the cartel would, securing your unwavering obedience through a debt of life that you can never possibly repay. The terrifying line between the good guys and the bad guys dissolves completely in your mind, leaving you permanently trapped as an owned asset in a shadow war you never wanted to fight. You belong to Harrison completely now, and he knows it, which is exactly why his next command sends a paralyzing shockwave straight down your spine. He tells you that taking down Trey is no longer enough to justify the immense federal resources they are spending to keep your mother alive. They are finally ready to move up the criminal food chain, bypassing the street level enforcers and the mid-tier bosses, to aim directly at the untouchable regional kingpin, Elias. But to gather the lethal evidence they need to topple his empire. Harrison needs you to do the absolute unthinkable. He needs you to stop hiding safely in the background of Trey's operation and step directly into Elias's heavily fortified inner circle, thrusting you into a terrifying suicide mission where you must walk straight into the belly of the beast. The promotion into Elias's heavily guarded syndicate comes at the exact moment the entire cartel infrastructure begins to violently collapse under the weight of your whispered secrets. You are suddenly sitting at polished mahogany tables where multi-million-dollar shipments are planned, memorizing coordinates and cartel blueprints that you immediately feed back to the DEA, resulting in a devastating string of synchronized highway interceptions that cannot possibly be written off as bad luck. The undeniable reality that a high-level informant is actively bleeding the organization forces Elias to halt all operations and summon a phantom from across the southern border, a legendary cartel inquisitor whose sole terrifying purpose is to hunt down rats. The stories about this nameless specialist have circulated through the Miami underworld like a dark myth, detailing his gruesome, psychological methods of extracting the truth from men who swore they would rather die than talk. The inevitable knock on your door comes at 3 a.m, and before you can even process the panic, you are dragged into a suffocating, windowless basement beneath a deserted slaughterhouse that reeks of stale cigarettes, dried blood, and absolute despair. The Inquisitor does not bring out rusted tools or weapons. Instead, he sits across from you under a single swaying light bulb, exhaling thick clouds of gray smoke while asking deceptively simple questions designed to mentally strip you naked. He watches the microscopic dilation of your pupils, the involuntary twitch of your fingers, and the exact rhythmic cadence of your breathing as he slowly tightens the psychological noose around your neck. The sheer, overwhelming terror threatens to crack your mind in half, but the rigorous, grueling hours of counter-interrogation, training Special Agent Harrison drilled into your head, suddenly take over like a secondary survival instinct. You forcefully slow your heart rate, maintain dead-eyed, unblinking contact, and meticulously match the Inquisitor's aggressive posture, utilizing every single microscopic psychological trick you learned to project the flawless aura of a loyal, highly offended cartel lieutenant. The silence stretches into an agonizing eternity as the specialist dissects your soul, looking for a single fracture in your armor, before he finally exhales a long drag of smoke and dismisses you with a terrifyingly ambiguous nod. You walk out of that rotting basement, with your life temporarily intact, your shirt entirely soaked in cold sweat, but the crippling relief instantly evaporates when one of Elias's guards casually mentions that the specialist is not done. He is moving past the psychological evaluations and has already begun relentlessly tearing into the offshore bank records, encrypted phone logs, and financial histories of every single person in the inner circle. The invisible clock ticking above your head suddenly accelerates into a deafening roar, because no amount of mental conditioning or perfect eye contact can hide the digital footprint of a DEA phantom fund. And you know with absolute horrifying certainty that it is only a matter of days before he finds the thread that leads directly to your mother's hospital bed. The final 90 days of your undercover existence bleed together into a hallucinatory blur of sheer panic and frantic intelligence, gathering as Agent Harrison desperately accelerates the federal timeline to beat the cartel's Inquisitor to the truth. You are sleeping barely 3 hours a night, surviving entirely on bitter coffee and the sheer adrenaline of impending doom while you frantically feed the DEA the ultimate blueprint of Elias's sprawling narcotic empire. You know the specialist is getting dangerously close to uncovering the phantom medical payments, saving Helen's life, his digital hound sniffing relentlessly at the edges of your fabricated reality, making every single ring of your cell phone feel like a detonation sequence. Then, on a brutally humid Tuesday morning just before dawn, the sky above Miami completely shatters as the DEA unleashes the most massive, coordinated tactical strike in Florida's history. Heavily armored tactical units kick down doors across 3 different counties simultaneously, seizing millions in offshore cash and violently ripping the untouchable cartel infrastructure out by its bloody roots. You watch the chaotic aftermath on a flickering television screen in an empty warehouse, witnessing the absolute surreal spectacle of Elias being shoved into the back of a federal transport van in handcuffs right outside his heavily fortified waterfront mansion. The paralyzing shock of the kingpin's downfall barely has time to register before your burner phone vibrates with a single encrypted text from Harrison containing nothing but a set of coordinates and a strict 10-minute deadline. The extraction protocol has been fully activated. You abandon your car, your apartment, and every single physical anchor to your past life, sprinting into the suffocating humidity to meet an unmarked black SUV idling ominously in a deserted alleyway. Heavily armed federal agents pull you inside without a single word, the vehicle tearing through the neon-drenched streets toward a private airfield where a government jet is already spooling its engines on the tarmac. You find Helen waiting inside the stark cabin, visibly terrified and confused, completely unaware of the staggering magnitude of the criminal empire her son just annihilated just to pay for her chemotherapy. As the wheels leave the runway and the glittering, dangerous lights of Miami shrink into the dark ocean below, a hollow, crushing emptiness entirely swallows you whole. You have miraculously survived the impossible, escaping the lethal grip of both the cartel and the federal government. But you realize with chilling certainty that the boy who originally drove those 2 kilos of cocaine up the I-95 is now officially dead, permanently erased from existence. 2 years later, the freezing wind of Omaha, Nebraska bites at your face as you walk out of a completely different warehouse, carrying a cheap plastic lunchbox under the fabricated identity of David. Witness protection handed you a fresh social security number, a modest government relocation stipend, and a quiet, agonizingly lonely existence thousands of miles away from the neon-drenched streets of Miami. Your mother, who was meticulously renamed Sarah by the feds, passed away peacefully in her sleep last winter from sudden heart failure brought on by the aggressive chemotherapy, taking her final breath in a warm bed without ever discovering the devastating, bloody truth of how her life was temporarily saved. You stood entirely alone at her unmarked grave in the frozen Midwestern dirt, fully grasping the bitter, agonizing reality that your ultimate sacrifice changed absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of the criminal underworld. The evening news occasionally broadcast brief, violent flashes of your old cartel operating smoothly under a brand new, equally ruthless kingpin, proving that the exact same poison is simply flowing through different hands while the relentless federal war continues completely without you. You are nothing but a nameless ghost now, yet the paralyzing paranoia never truly leaves your bloodstream. You still meticulously memorize the out-of-state license plate of every unfamiliar car that idles too long outside your modest apartment, and your heart still skips a violent, terrifying beat whenever a stranger unexpectedly calls out your real name in a crowded grocery store. The crushing, permanent fear is simply the invisible tax on survival, the final, inescapable price of that impossible mathematical choice you made in a federal holding cell when you were just 29 years old. If this harrowing descent into the shadows made you question everything you know about the criminal underworld, drop a comment below and hit that subscribe button to uncover more terrifying true stories they never want you to hear.